every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill made low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. Hello everyone, this is Gilgamesh, and we are starting on the second half of Isaiah, a section often referred to as Deutero-Isaiah. Let's talk a little bit about why that is, and what we're going to see that's different in this second half than what we have in the first half. Well, for one thing, Isaiah chapter 39 is the last time we will actually see the name Isaiah anywhere. And the entire second half of the book, his name does not appear anywhere. And so that was one of the factors that people decided that maybe this isn't the same person who's writing this, but maybe this was a later prophet that was writing this material in the second half of the book. There are far less historical references in the second half of the book. It's a very different kind of messaging, where the first half is very tied into the politics and the history of the time. The second half takes a bit of a higher moral ground and a sweeping, promising theological view of what is to come. It's much less concerned with the day-to-day politics that the first half of the book was very concerned with. The general thought here is that chapters 1 through 39 were written by Isaiah ben Amos, the prophet who is named in the book, and then that chapters 40 through 55 were written by Deutero-Isaiah, where it is roughly a century and a half to 2 centuries later that someone is writing there. And then the final section here, Isaiah 56 to 66, is actually Trito-Isaiah, and this is reflected yet later into the fully returned community. The evidence for this is sparse, to say the least. There's no textual evidence whatsoever that this was ever thought of as 3 separate texts. And we went through some of this with the Torah previously, where people went to the documentary hypothesis. That was very popular and has some real grounding behind it. And now I would say that the documentary hypothesis of the Torah is now become the minority view, that it is considered that that wasn't well grounded in how texts actually develop, and that there wasn't enough evidence behind it. That doesn't mean that people have suddenly started believing that, the traditional story of the text being all written by Moses is now the majority view. But it does mean that the view that there were 4 separate circulating documents that were edited together is no longer a view that is held by the majority, coming for a much more complex series of redactions and editings being a more logical understanding of it. I think Isaiah is going to go through the same thing. That the idea that there are simply 3 different texts here that have been stitched together, I don't think holds up very well. Now, that's not to say that there's not editing that occurred. It does seem very likely that some editing happened after the original text was put down, that different generations may have added glosses, they may have inserted some of their ideas into the text, and so it is always a bit of a detective work to try and peel back some of that to see what perhaps the original author intended on some of these. But it's a very complex thing that doesn't fit so nicely into the 3 sections. And for that matter, a lot of the things that we would say are unique to chapters 40 through 55 turn out to not be so unique when you take a close look. And the solution to that has been to say, well, then in that case, some of the parts of 1 to 39 also must be Deutero-Isaiah. And so there's been a lot of pushback from the scholarly community with that, as people have pointed out that things that are said to be unique about 40 through 55 actually do appear in chapters 1 through 39. The solution has just simply been to say, well, then those sections are late also. And it becomes a bit of a circular argument at that point. But that's where we're at with this. But let's talk about some of the specific things here. Where section 1 through 39, speaks a lot about impending judgment and doom and the decline of the nation due to sinful disobedience of the people and their leaders. Section 40 all the way through 66 changes quite a bit and goes to a message of comfort and consolation and the promise of a miraculous, joyful return to Jerusalem and to Zion. And so the theme is entirely different here, that it is not condemning the people so much as it is promising that they will be able to come back to Jerusalem and that they have been forgiven and that the redemption has taken place. So it is a much more joyful and upbeat theme in that sense. And of course, Isaiah, as we said, is never mentioned. The voice of chapters 40 through 66 is often described as anonymous. I think that's probably a little too far there. I think that the traditional understanding until quite a bit post-biblical was that all of this was Isaiah's voice throughout, but it is a different voice and it does not ever explicitly self-reference. There's also the difference in the word servant, Eved. And this one's an interesting one. In the first 39 chapters, the word servant only occurs 9 times. And only one of these is it religiously significant, where it says, my servant Isaiah in chapter 20, verse 3. All the rest of the times that it's used, it refers to more ordinary slaves, or to servants, such as the Eliakim is referred to as a servant, or we have my servant David for historical legends. We believe that it's a later Deuteronomistic theological development that the term servant becomes so common for someone who is a servant of the Lord. I don't know how well that really holds up. That theory comes largely from Joseph Blenkinsop, who is extremely well respected in this area, but I'm just not seeing it that well. I think that, when we talk about my servant David and my servant Isaiah, we are kind of using it that way. And the idea that you were a servant of the king was an honorable position, so the idea that being a servant of the Lord being an honorable position, it's not really, I don't know that it's quite the Deuteronomistic development that it's claimed. I think there's some good evidence to argue against that. But if it is a Deuteronomistic development, it probably would link more to the time of Josiah, which would be a bit later than Isaiah. And that's where they're going from here. Now, in Isaiah chapters 40 through 66, the term servant occurs 32 times, considerably more. And it is used in the singular to represent the community of Israel, or the descendants of Abraham. And it also shifts to a suffering individual, a servant of the Lord, who acts as a messenger or prophet. And so it takes on a very special meaning here of this special servant. And we'll talk about that as we come into the servant songs. But the word for servant, Eved, does appear much more frequently in the second half of the book. And it is argued that it has some different weight in its semantic meaning. Now, the other thing here to realize is that in Isaiah 1 through 39, we have very short poems. And I've often discussed this, that in a single chapter, we'd often have 3 or 4 separate poems that are kind of stitched together. They were not very cohesive on their themes. They didn't have long poetry. They had often short snippets. It seems like things that you would hear more in the marketplace and in public and in oration than it is something that you would have that was well devised and written down. Whereas we come to chapters 40 through 55, and the whole thing is one highly cohesive, crafted section that looks like it is well crafted for a written text. It doesn't look like it was spoken text that was then later preserved through memory, but it looks like this was really well thought out and designed to be a very long, extended poem. And it's really well done language. Just the artistry to it is supreme. It inspires a lot of hymns, as well as the oratorio by George Frederick Handel. Lots of it is taken from the second portion. But there's also plenty of hymns as well that come from this, just because the language is so powerful, and even in translation, it's just remarkable. So we have really elevated language, chapters 40 through 55, and we have a much longer, more cohesive poetry style than anything in the first 39 chapters. Not that there wasn't great poetry there, but it was short. It was not long, extended poetry, whereas 40 through 55 is much longer, more extended, and honestly, in a lot of ways, more soaring. So the idea is that 40 through 55 were written by someone who lived close to the time of Cyrus the Great. And this, of course, is the smoking gun, is that in two verses, Isaiah 44:28, the last verse of the chapter, and 45:1, the first verse of the chapter, it mentions Cyrus by name. Now, this is 150 years into the future from Isaiah's time. The idea is that that's a little crazy to think that somebody could prophesy by name of somebody that would live a century and a half later. And it is unprecedented even in the Bible that somebody would do that. I also don't know that two verses means the entire thing was written in that time period. During the time of Cyrus the Great, people were very interested in gaining his affection for the Jewish people, and it's quite believable that they just decided to edit him in to a text in a place where they felt he fit. I honestly don't feel like the surrounding text fits him very well at all. And so I tend to be more a proponent of this theory that those references may have been a later editing by a people that were very interested in courting his favor because they wanted him to return the Jews to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. They wanted to, get out of slavery. So there was a lot of motivation to win his favor, and it very well could be that somebody edited him in at that point. The fact that he only appears in two verses is a problem. Now, it is assumed that much of the discussion around those two verses is about him because his name shows up there. I don't know that it has to be. If we were to adjust those two verses out of there so that it doesn't have his name, I don't know that the surrounding discussion is anything that's really particular to Cyrus. But he is in those two verses, and that does seem problematic in that people who wrote it must have known about him and had him in their life, and so therefore we would date it sometime around his reign, which would put it around 539 BCE or so, as opposed to Isaiah here, who lives up until just a little after 700 BCE. So we have that there. We also have people have raised this question here that why would Isaiah be so concerned about Judeans that are living 2 centuries later and not his own people? This is a argument that's raised in like the Anchor Bible on its section on Isaiah for this. But I think that is a false dichotomy. You don't have to not be concerned about the people that you are with to be concerned about future generations. I don't think those are an either or kind of thing. They also say that the text doesn't say that the Lord's going to do this in 200 years. It speaks as though it's happening now and that it's been accomplished. And that is true, that it doesn't seem to talk about this as a far-off thing. It does seem to be talking to them in a contemporary sense that it's happening now. But I also don't know that that's all that unusual for the way that prophets speak. They do seem to address the future as though it is now. So I don't feel like any of these are really big, insurmountable problems here. What I think is happening in this is Isaiah has made several references at this point to writing down his message and sealing it. He talked about a sealed book that would come forward that would speak from the dead. And so he is talking about words coming back long after people have died. And so the idea that it never says it's 200 years in the future, well, he kind of did say that a sealed book would come forward and it would be his words, and he sealed it up with witnesses at the birth of one of his sons, and this book is referenced a few times. It may be that this section is that sealed book, that he was intending for a message to a later people, an important thing to show them that he did see what was going to happen to them and prepared a message for them. That is a way to understand this. I will be very clear that is a minority opinion. The majority opinion is that this is written by a later author. I don't want to try and make it sound like this is a mainstream view. It's not. It is my view, though, and I don't have any particular evidence to back it up. I don't want to make the idea that this is something you could prove. Nobody can prove this stuff. We're looking back in time quite a bit. Looking at our oldest copies of Isaiah, though, are in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and there it appears as a single book. And people in the late Second Temple period, which is the earliest we really have anyone discussing this, all speak of it as a single book. The idea that it was multiple authors came much, much later in history. well 1,000 years after the biblical period closed. So at the time of our oldest records, everybody assumed it was one book. It's only in quite a bit later that people start thinking of this as being separate authors. Now, some will argue too that there is some vocabulary that is introduced in the second half of Isaiah that is not present in the first half, and there is some vocabulary in the first half that is not present in the second half. And that is true. There is also some vocabulary that is unique to Isaiah that does appear in both halves. When that happens, scholars come up with new theories about how the old stuff was really new stuff. And yeah, it like I said, circular arguments there. So I don't think that the vocabulary and the grammar arguments hold a lot of weight. The idea that the second half of Isaiah shows more influence from Aramaic, that really doesn't hold up well at all. The idea that the second half of Isaiah has unique words to it that would indicate a different authorship, I think that's flimsy to make such a dramatic pronunciation on. I mean, yes, it is evidence in that column, but it's not very convincing or persuasive evidence. Now, the other thing that they'll point out is there's a stronger idea of absolute monotheism in the second half of Isaiah. Again, I don't know that that holds up well either. Many people have looked at it and seen quite the opposite. But one of the things that is really interesting is regardless of whether you think there's one author or two or three or 15, is that the end book that we get has a certain amount of literary cohesiveness to it, where we have the shorter poems in the beginning that come to a historical interlude in the middle, which introduce the idea of the Babylonian captivity, and then the second half that talks about the return from Babylon. And there is an envelope structure where chapters 1 and chapters 55 and 56 reflect each other in very clear and distinct ways. A lot of the imagery from the first chapter of the book, such as the rebellious cults and gardens, the inextinguishable fire, and the rebellion against the Lord, all appear with very similar wording in the final two chapters of the book. It seems that this envelope structure of the entire book was intentional and would have had to have been done by one of the last editors, making the whole thing a strong literary cohesive. So even if you wanted to suggest that there were multiple authors across time, the end result is a single cohesive literary work and not just simply two books that were stitched together. There are so many things in the second half of the book that reference the first half. There is no grounding whatsoever to say that it was a completely separate idea. There is more that connects them than separates them. But the other thing to address here is this idea of why would Isaiah be talking about return from exile? And I think this overlooks Isaiah's life. Isaiah lived at a time when in 721 BCE, the entire northern kingdom of Israel was carried off into exile. He saw a whole nation of his brethren pushed into slavery and carried away to Mesopotamia. It was around this time that the population of Jerusalem exploded as refugees from the north, we believe, came down to be in Jerusalem to get away from the Assyrians. They watched as Assyria romped through their countryside, captured their second largest city, and probably deported a lot of people from their kingdom all the way to Mesopotamia. And they would have been throughout the city of Jerusalem for the last 20 years of his ministry, all these people that had been displaced and had been had their family and friends carried away by the Assyrians, that yes, the idea of we've been taken away captive and someday they'll be brought back would have resonated a lot with the people of his time. This is not something that only would have resonated with people in Babylon. I think there is a lot of good reason why Isaiah would have wanted to address the idea that these people who have been taken will come back and that Israel will be restored to its former state. The idea that that all reflects a later time, I don't think holds up very well. I think there are a lot of things prevalent in Isaiah's last 20 years of his life there that really reflect the idea that this would have been an important theme, that he would have seen many people carried away captive, and there would have been many people around him wondering, will we ever come back? Will we ever get these people back that were taken? And so I think there's plenty about that would justify a lot of this second half of Isaiah. But I think it probably was a written work rather than an oral work. I think that it was probably maybe his magnum opus of his life here to put this together. It's longer, it's more cohesive, and let's get into it. We start here with, comfort ye. Comfort ye, my people, saith your God. Speak unto the heart of Jerusalem, and call out unto her. So we don't have any introductory stuff here of the word of the Lord came to me saying, nothing like that. We just go straight into it. And we start here with an imperative verb, two of them actually, identical imperative verbs saying, comfort, comfort my people. Now, I have to admit, in English, I didn't pick up so much growing up that these were imperative verbs. I thought it was talking to the people, telling them that they should be comforted, but it's not. This is a masculine plural imperative verb here. He's talking to a group of people, multiple people, and telling them to comfort his people. The people are the direct object, not the noun of address. And so this opens up the big question of, who is he talking to? There is one view that he's talking to members of the divine council. And again, we've already blown apart the idea that there's some extreme monotheism in the second part of Isaiah, if we take that view. But here he's talking about the idea that he may be addressing the divine council, saying that they should all comfort his people. Or another possible thing is that he's talking about a group of prophets that are supposed to comfort Israel. But the problem with that is there's no record of a group of prophets at this time period that this would have been. In fact, in the literary prophets, that's the ones who kind of wrote their book rather than the ones that are told stories about in like the historical books of Kings and Samuels. But in the literary prophets, there's no mention at all of groups of prophets. So this would be unique if this was talking about a group of prophets that is supposed to comfort the people. The other thought is that maybe it's speaking to the nations overall, that they are to comfort Israel. That would fit with a lot of Isaiah's prophecies of the various kings of the earth helping gather his people back in. But we really don't know, and this is an area of speculation here. Who is he's talking to? And of course, I can't hear these words without hearing Handel's Messiah in my head. Many of the words in this chapter inspired that oratorio. Beautiful stuff. Go listen to it. And we have here that these people that are to comfort the people are going to speak to the heart of Jerusalem and call out to her. A lot of translations have cry here, cry to her. But I wanted to make it clear that this is not weep. This is not mourning or sadness or anything like that. This is calling out like you're calling someone to invite them to come to you. Cry is a way to say that, but it can be misunderstood in English to mean that you're weeping with them or something like that. No, this is a joyous thing here. Call out to her. Speak to her heart and call out to her. And why are we calling out to her? For her enlistment is fulfilled, and her iniquity is carried off. Okay, her enlistment here. This is a word that has a lot of military overtures to it. It was thought of that this exile is like an indentured servitude, which was a reality for a lot of people, that when you ran on hard times, you sometimes had to sell a family member into servitude to survive. And it helped them survive. It helped those that were left behind to survive. And it was intended to be for a temporary time that eventually you paid off the debt and then you were free. It's kind of putting it in that sense there. Although with the military meaning here, the word here, it's used a few times to indicate non-voluntary military service, sort of like being drafted. And so it may not be so much as a slave or a prisoner, but more of that they have done their mandatory tour of duty here. It's a fascinating term that to think about here, that they have had to serve their time. And then we say that all their sins are carried off. This is a bit of a less common term, that this is the only time it actually appears in the passive nephal is here. But this is an unusual term for talking about the forgiveness of sins, but they've been carried off. She has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. So she, being Zion, has paid for her sins, but had to pay back a double portion. There are a couple of places where a double portion is stipulated. We see it in Exodus 22 verses... Oh, I think these verses are wrong on my notes here. But in Exodus 22, it occurs a few times there where somebody has to give back a double restitution when they steal or when they cause their livestock to go where it's not supposed to. Also, Deuteronomy 21:17, we have a double portion for the firstborn. So this doubling idea is common, but those references don't actually use this word for double. This is a less common word, kethel. And it's actually in a dual form here, not a form that we have in English, but it means exactly two. But yeah, this is an unusual phrase here, the double that she has paid back. But she's done her time, and she's done it twice over, is what we're saying. She's paid everything she can be expected to pay. And then we have verse 3 here, a voice crying. In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Now, in the Hebrew, it's a little unclear where we should divide up the words here. You can read it as a voice crying in the wilderness, and then the beginning of the quote. Or you can do it as I did it here, a voice crying, and then we start the quote at that point, in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. I think that works better because the way, the path that they're preparing, is in the wilderness, in the Midbar. Now, there's two words here that mean wilderness or desert. The first one here is Midbar, which usually means a bit more of like a scrub desert, where there's, small plants and water is scarce, but it's not like just rolling sands of the Sahara. But then there's another word that's used here, which is Aravah. And Aravah tends to mean that harsher, more Sahara sands kind of desert. And they're used in parallel here, so they are using them as synonyms. And if this is to be seen as the return from Mesopotamia, which I believe is the correct understanding here, this area that they're going to have to cross to come back is a very harsh path that they're going to have to go on. The word here, when it says prepare, actually comes from the same root as the word for face. And just like the English, where we can take our noun face and use it as a verb meaning to turn towards something, to face something, the Hebrew does work that same way. But here, where it's in relation to a road, I don't think it's saying that they should face the road. What it's talking about is more like put a face on the road, which we also do kind of in English when we say that we want to resurface the road. They're saying here they need to face the road, meaning they want to clear it out and level it and make it fit for travel. They want to make a smooth path here. So when we're saying prepare the road of the Lord or prepare the way of the Lord, that's what we're talking about, is clear it out from debris. Make it so that you can move across this thing well. Now, there is also two words here translated as way and highway. Synonyms, of course. The word for way is pretty ordinary, the word that means path, that used very frequently in the Hebrew Bible. But the other word here that means highway is, well, it's nothing like what we would think of in modern terms by the word highway. It didn't involve asphalt or anything like that. But this is something that can mean a path that has been firmed up with stones or fill. And so this is a very well taken care of road. And that is part of what we're talking about here, is that they're going to be coming back and they're going to be crossing a very large stretch of desert. They're going to need very high quality roads as they bring their livestock, their animals, their cart wagons, everything across the desert here to this Zion that they're heading forth. that they will need a well-marked, well-cared-for path. And to keep in mind here, this is before anyone really knew what a map was. Our very first maps show up around the time of the return from Babylon, and they're not navigational aids. They're more of trying to show how the mythology fits into the land. You could not take the maps that we have from this time and think you could navigate anywhere with them. That would come later. So when you talk about getting from one place to another distant place, you needed a well-marked road. And that's what we're saying here, is to get that road ready to make it fit for travel by a large group of people. And they're going to be going across the wilderness here to Zion, 1,000 miles. It's a big deal. And the entry into Jerusalem, there's this big problem of a giant rift valley along the Jordan Valley here that, let me just show you a cross section here. As you come in from the east, you've got to go all the way down below sea level and then climb your way all the way back up again to get back to Jerusalem, which was at the top of the mountains. Now, I do want to make some notes about scale here. Jerusalem, you can see on this picture, is about 2,600 feet above sea level. I am right now sitting much higher than that from sea level. The mountains we're talking about are not like what people in the American West think of as mountains. This is not the Rockies. I have mountains near me that are over 11,000 feet high, and I'm sitting well over 4,000 feet high now. So yeah, Jerusalem at 2,600 is not exactly giant, but it is a big deal when you're trying to get your family and your oxes and your donkeys and all that across all this where there's limited water. This is a big deal that you're going to have to really descend down into a valley and then climb up into mountains. It was a rigorous journey. And so a lot of the themes here have to do with making the journey easier. And that's where we come to verse 4. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill made low. The uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. So, great bit of imagery there, beautiful bit there. We have here that the uneven ground shall become level. The crooked shall be made straight, is how King James brings it along. And it's beautiful. The prophet here, he's looking out at this landscape that is just so difficult to cross. And he imagines it all just smoothing out so that there aren't these huge dips and climbs to get over. The word for rough places, it's a word that occurs only here. And its meaning is largely known because of the context of this sentence. And it says that the rough places will become a plain. Well, the word here indicates a wide U-shaped valley with gentle sides. It sounds a lot like the glacier-cut valleys of Utah that I'm very familiar with. They have this nice U-shape to them, which gives you this big, wide area where you can travel through, as opposed to V-shaped valleys, which often are much more difficult to navigate because at the bottom of the V is usually a river and the sides are often very steep and difficult to get through. U-shaped valleys often have a much wider area for travel. So this is what we're talking about here, is the rough, broken up places are going to become this wide valley that takes you down to Zion. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Then we have a return here. A voice saying, cry. And I said, what shall I cry? So this obviously is very similar to the voice we heard before that was saying to prepare the way. Now we're having a voice that's saying cry, meaning cry out again, not cry as in weep, but cry out. And we have here, what shall I cry? It looks very similar to the divine call that Isaiah had back in chapter 6. And perhaps this is maybe a truncated version of that, meant to simply reference it, an allusion to it. The text here has, and he said, what shall I cry? but that doesn't seem like it's correct. The Dead Sea Scrolls actually has an extra letter here to indicate where the vowels are, making this much more likely to be a first person, and so it probably should read, "and I said," which is what I went with in my translation. "And I said, what is it that I should be crying out?" So this, which follows here, is the message that the person being spoken to here is supposed to cry out. We assume must be Isaiah. "All flesh is grass, and all his glory like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades, for the breath of the Lord blows on it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever." So, first I will point out that the "surely the people are grass" is out of place here. It doesn't look like it belongs. Most people say this is very likely a gloss from later editors, adding in their own interpretation of the symbolism to make sure it is clear. It breaks the rhythm of the poetry. Doesn't seem like it's original. So probably an addition from a later editor. The word here in the first two lines, "all flesh is grass and his glory is like the flower of the field," that word glory is actually the word Hesed, which is a very special word that means loving kindness or a special familial or covenantal bond. It doesn't seem like the right word here. That his loving kindness is like the flower of the field, meaning something that will fade. Doesn't seem correct. It also doesn't match up with what we have in plenty of other sources based on the Septuagint, the Syriac, the Vulgate, and this verse is even quoted in the Christian New Testament in 1 Peter 1:24. All of those places say that the word should be something more like glory, doxa. And so there are two candidates here of how we might reconstruct this word. The most likely one, I think, is the one that changes the middle letter, called a samech in the word chesed, to a mem, which looks a bit like a samech. And that changes it to chemed, which would mean beauty. So his beauty is like the flower. That makes sense. Beauty like a flower, sure. The other change that could be happening here involves changing out all three letters, but two of those letters look very similar to the letters there, and that would mean something more like power or majesty rather than beauty. So we don't know which word was here originally. Almost certainly wasn't chesed. That doesn't seem to work well in context. I had proposed in a different video a theory that might have made it work. I don't know that that's right. But it seems more likely that this word chesed probably doesn't belong here, that this is probably the wrong word here. And most translations do come up with something like glory or power, that speaking of mankind, that his glory, his power is something that fades, and not that his loving kindness is something that fades. Now, the word for flower here is a tzitz, and this was a common emblem on a royal crown, including the high priest, and his crown in the temple had a tzitz on it. And comparing man's glory or his power to a flower probably bears several layers of meaning here if you think about that kings had this symbol on their crown. And so we have here the idea that the grass dries up, the flower fades. There is, of course, a lot of agricultural poetry here as we talk about these things. That's very common throughout the time. It was a major part of their lives. But in this case, there's also this idea of an incremental repetition, that as you repeat, you come up with things for stronger emphasis. And in this case here, we come to the ultimate end here with the word of the Lord stands forever. So we're building in importance here. I will point out that all of verse 7, which is that first part, the grass withers, the flower fades, for the breath of the Lord blows on it, surely the people are grass, that entire verse is missing from the Septuagint. So that's interesting. And that also means that the part that I said was likely a gloss, surely the people are grass, we don't have that at all in the Septuagint either, so we can't see if it included it or not to try and see if it had entered the text by that date. We just simply don't know. But if we take out that gloss, there's an interesting threefold repetition going on here with this grass flower wording here. That we talk about grass then flower 3 times here. And this threefold repetition does seem to be a bit of a theme in this chapter. And we come here to verse 9. Upon a high mountain, go up for you, good herald of Zion. Lift up with power your voice, good herald of Jerusalem. Lift up, fear not. Say to the cities of Judah, behold your God. So Zion here, and particularly the herald of Zion, is personified as a woman again. All of the verbs in this section are feminine. She has to climb up a mountain and declare her good news. In fact, the only time that anything masculine is used in this section is when it refers to the people she is speaking to when she says, your God, where it is a masculine plural. So yes, we have a woman instructed to climb up the mountain here and declare her message to a group of either men or mixed people, saying, behold your God. So she is the deliverer of the message here upon the mountaintop. Now, I've mentioned before in a different video that the word here that is a herald of good news is a homonym with a word that means flesh. And we've just had the word flesh twice above saying that all flesh shall see it together and saying that all flesh is grass. The choice here of a messenger of good news being a homonym with a word for flesh might be a deliberate play on the similarity of those words. Etymologically, they come from different roots. They just happen to be spelled alike. But I think that was not lost on Isaiah, and I think that that kind of thing is an intentional thing that he often engages in. And I wanted to point it out there because it's completely opaque in translation, that this word is similar to the word for flesh that he's just used twice. And we have here the idea of, here is your God. God's presence is manifest here with the power and love with which he brings the exiles back to their land. And we continue on verse 10. Behold, my master Lord, in strength he comes, and his arm rules for him. Behold, his wages are with him, and his reward before him. So we have a lot of threes in this chapter. Go up, lift, and now her message is a behold, behold, behold. Behold your God, behold my master Lord, behold he has his wages with him. So a lot of threefold repetition in this. Now, the idea of he has his wages with him, this is not wages he's earned so much, but he's going to pay people for what they deserve, is the idea here. That he's bringing the wages with him, and he's bringing his reward with him. And so this is the idea here, is that he's coming in strength. His arm is going to rule for him. And so his arm here is a symbol of power and strength that will be a way that he exerts his authority over the world here, is this arm. Now remember that, because we're about to come up with a different use of the word arm here in verse 11. Like a shepherd, his flock he shepherds. In his arms he will gather lambs. In his bosom he will carry. Nursing mothers he will gently lead. So the shepherd here who shepherds his flock, we've mentioned before in Hebrew they love doing this, where you use nouns and verbs that come from the same root in the same sentence. That is exactly what we're seeing here. We do the same thing with the English word shepherd. It can be a noun or a verb, and so I just followed what the Hebrew was doing. So it makes a lovely counterpoint to the previous verse here, where the overwhelming force of God, his arm commanding for him. Now we have this tender mercy here of a shepherd gathering lambs into his lap. We have here the idea that he's going to be worried about the new mothers, And this is, nursing mothers here is a single word in Hebrew indicating sheep that have still got suckling lambs. It's a specialized word for them here. So he's going to take those and he's going to specially gently lead those. He's going to carry them in his bosom. He's going to have his arms folded around them. Very different from the his arm is going to rule for him that we had in the last verse. So we have a lot of interesting contrasts here. Now, this video is already getting long. We're going to pause it here and we will come back on verse 12 in the next installment. And I want to leave it there, and I hope this has been good for you. If this is something that you've enjoyed, that's what that like button is for, and the subscribe button. Lately, YouTube has decided that nobody should see my videos. If you could help break that trend, that would be awesome. And until next time, take care. Shalom.